3 grown men acting like children.
Hello book friends! Today we are making our way through the Harry Potter series yet again. Today we're talking about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. This is the third book in the series. If you're unaware, I'm sure not very many of you are unaware. I've already read the book when I'm filming this intro, so I'm just going to talk a little bit now, and then you're going to see some clips of past me when I was reading it, and then we'll get into my final thoughts at the end of the video. When I was growing up, if I had to pick a favorite out of the Harry Potter series, this was my favorite. I'm not entirely sure why this was my favorite. It might have been partly because of the cover. I like the color scheme of this. I know that's quite a stupid reason to like a book, but if you watch my last video, the review on Axe of Violet, I think I said how much I love the cover, and that quite possibly influenced my overall liking of the book. So I'm a sucker for marketing, okay? Content-wise, the only thing that I can think of as to why I liked this book was just because of the night bus. Seriously, what is cooler than a triple-decker purple bus? Like, is anything cooler than that? A purple bus. When I was growing up, my brother and I were really into machinery. Like, all the machinery shows were our favorite. Thomas the Tank Engine, Theodore Tugboat, JJ the Jet Plane, like those were our shows. And so I think I was always just kind of attracted to the machinery. That probably made me more attracted to a triple-decker purple bus. I don't know. But when I think of this book and I think of like my childhood connection to this book, that is what I think of. So, I mean, it remains to be seen whether this remains my favorite book in the series, but I think it has a good chance. So if you'd like to read along with me and then see more of my final thoughts as we get into the third installment, which is arguably a turning point, in my opinion, in the series, then just keep watching. Let's go!
I know you don't mean to, but you're blocking my view. I know you got issues, but I got my shit too. I don't wanna be your therapy no more, no more. You don't wanna hear this, but it's you, it's not me.
Quite a lot of interaction so far between Scabbers and Crookshanks and Ron and Hermione, and just fighting about it. And I don't know, I definitely remember that Scabbers is Peter Pettigrew, but I don't remember anything else about Crookshanks. And it's just, they're making such a big deal out of it. I feel like there has to be something about Crookshanks that I'm forgetting. This can't all just be about Scabbers, right? So I'm on page 269, and this is right after Sirius Black breaks into Gryffindor Tower. And I just feel like this is the turning point for Harry. This is really the turning point where it gets real, that there's actually danger to him personally. Like, before, it was really kind of obscure. Like, there was danger in general, but it was never directed directly at Harry. And even after the beginning of this book, where Harry overhears Mr. and Mrs. Weasley talking about how Sirius Black is his godfather and is after him for whatever reason, it's like it never really sinks in for Harry. But this is the point where it really sinks in, and it's just that turning point. And I think this is kind of the point we've been waiting for, that will really bring this plot together as something that's really centered around Harry. So finally reached the point in the book where Hermione slaps Malfoy. Been waiting for this part. I feel like that was like the defining moment of the movie. So I've just been waiting for that to happen in the book. But it feels like it's a different context. And like just later on, I think in my final thoughts later, I'll talk more about what I think about Hermione's character in this particular book. But it just seems like in the movie, it was portrayed as it was meant to be a little bit more comical. But in this book, I feel like it's happening later in the book than it did in the movie. And it just, Hermione has a lot of pent up rage in this book, and a lot more than is portrayed in the movie. So, I mean, it's just different. So, it's like the same event happened, but it has a completely different feel than in the movie. And I mean, I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just interesting. Also, while I'm here, I'm on page 323, and I still don't know what the point of Professor Trelawney is. She just kind of seems to just be there as a little bit of a nuisance, giving kind of weird predictions. Yeah, so I really don't know what's going on with her. I feel like she will become important later at some point. She must, but it's just right now she kind of just seems like one of those characters that's just kind of there to fill space. I don't know. We'll see what happens with her.
3 grown men acting like children. Like professors. So we got Snape, Lupin, and Sirius Black, all grown men, 2 of whom are professors and 1 who is a professional criminal, allegedly. But either way, they're grown men, and they're acting like they're just acting like toddlers. They're just fighting and bickering over things that happened when 50 years ago. I don't know. Jesus Christ.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm supposed to go and make dinner, and I am reading, and I can't put it down. It just I am at a point where I feel like I just have to keep going. So dinner's gonna be a little late.
I once felt I'm done with the defense. Drove back and climbed over your fence. Had to show you that I was a mess. So you were shrugging your shoulders and closed off. That's what I told you. Soon enough, everything started to change. 'Cause there's no going back, no going back. There's no going back to your old life. Not living in the past, we're over that. I'm feeling it tonight, riding on the dizzying heights. Riding on the dizzying heights.
Hello book friends, I am back, and now we're going to talk about my final thoughts on Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Now that I finished the 3rd book, I really just feel like the plot is getting better and better. So when I was reading the 1st book, I was a little bit worried about the overall plot. And then when I was reading the 2nd book, I was like, this is getting better. And now that I've read the 3rd book, I'm convinced. The plot just keeps getting thicker and deeper, and I'm no longer worried that I am going to feel like the plot is too juvenile, because there is a ton going on. Also, I am liking that just as an adult, I'm really understanding the plot better. I'm understanding the little details a lot better than I did when I was a kid. So from my reading when I was a kid, I remember that Scabbers was actually Peter Pettigrew, and somehow they ended up in this building that they called the Shrieking Shack, and that's where they finally came face to face with Sirius. But I didn't have any idea how that happened. Like, it all just kind of happened. Come to find out, as an adult, it was Crookshanks. Like, Crookshanks was the catalyst that made all of this possible. And when I was a kid, I really just looked at him like he was just a cat doing cat things, chasing a rat because he was a rat, and that's what cats do. But really, Crookshanks is what made all of this possible. So you gotta give it up for Crookshanks. Plot points are appearing sooner and are feeling like they're more threaded throughout the story. So we're moving away from like the short story style that I enjoyed in the first book just because that made it interesting while we were working on the world building. But now it's really starting to develop a plot that is bigger than just the individual chapters. Two of the major plot points in this book are the Grimm and Sirius. Of course, we know they were one and the same, but we didn't know that at the time. The Grimm pops up in like the first couple of chapters right after Harry blows up his Aunt Marge. He gets to Hogwarts and Trelawney kind of harps on the Grimm several times. She really just antagonizes the story over it. And then Harry sees the Grimm one night when he wakes up at night, and then another time he spots it on the Quidditch field. And so it's really just this running plot point that you are never able to forget. I'm really enjoying having things to follow. Even in the last book, there were things to follow, but it was developing more slowly and kind of just felt a little bit less consequential. Like things were happening at school and in their lives, but it wasn't life or death for Harry. And that's another reason why I think this book is really just a turning point in the tone and direction of the series, because up until this point, there were things happening in the world, but none of it was really affecting Harry personally. It was implied that Harry had something to do with this, he's in danger somehow, but it was never really specified how or why he was in danger. But in this book, now that we have the threat of Sirius, Harry has this specific threat directly towards him. And so it just makes the stakes so much higher. And so Harry actually feels the connection to this world himself. It raises the stakes for him, for the book, and that just makes it that much more fun for the reader. So I know there's been discussions about how the series starts out really lighthearted and then it gets continuously darker as the books go on. I was hearing this discussion when I was young, probably in high school right after the series completed, and I wasn't really that interested then. So I actually don't know much about how discussions have gone about the series as a whole after it was completed. So I'm really looking at it from my own perspective. I haven't done much research. I've researched a little bit of things just because I can't help myself. I'm really trying to look at it through my own fresh eyes and not take in too much of what anybody else has said, and really just see it how I want to see it at this point, having just finished the third book. I'm really pleased with how it's going. I am enjoying the pacing. I enjoyed the ease in to the world during the first book, and then the second book built on that, and the third book, this is where we're like really getting going. And I think the pacing has just been perfect. And so has just the development of the characters and the tone. I think I mentioned when I was discussing the first book that there was a ton of humor that I just missed in the first book when I was a kid because I just wasn't looking for humor. Now in the third book, there was a lot less humor. Like it's a lot less funny just because the overall tone is getting darker, and that is the intention. But I did enjoy that there were a few good jokes in there. Right at the end, J.K. Rowling threw in that last little bit of humor that really like brought it back and just made it feel like this is the same world, this is the same story. We're not like going off the rails into a completely different direction when maybe you started The Sorcerer's Stone thinking this is going to be kind of funny, and now it's all dark and not funny. I think it's in like the second to the last paragraph. Harry gets off the train, he goes through the barrier at King's Cross, he sees Uncle Vernon, and Uncle Vernon's like acting all grumpy. Actually, I'm wondering why he's even there. We'll talk more about that later. Anyway, he goes up to Uncle Vernon and he's like, yeah, my uncle's a murderer, and I should just read it to you, huh? It's a letter from my godfather. Godfather, spluttered Uncle Vernon. You haven't got a godfather. Yes, I have, said Harry brightly. He was my mom and dad's best friend. He's a convicted murderer, and he's broken out of wizard prison, and he's on the run. He likes to keep in touch with me, though. Keep up with my news. Check if I'm happy. And, grinning broadly at the look of horror on Uncle Vernon's face, Harry set off towards the station exit. I'm pretty sure that was meant to be just a final joke, and I mean, I thought it was a great final joke. I thought it was great. That was pretty funny. And so going off of just like the progression of the tone, I felt like in this book, there's a lot more just wisdom and responsibility and trust that goes on with the kids. And they're starting to, and even the adults are starting to not treat them as kids so much anymore. In the first two books, they were really treated like they were students and children, because I mean, really they were. They're 11 and 12 years old. They were kids and they were inexperienced. But now they're in their third year, they're 13, which is not mature by any means, but they've been in the world long enough that they have a little bit more experience dealing with magical things. And I guess it could work both ways. It could just be that J.K. Rowling wanted to insert a little bit more thoughtfulness and wisdom into just the writing itself because she knows that the audience is getting older, but also it's that the teachers are taking the kids more seriously and giving them a little bit more of an opportunity to grow emotionally. The place where I really noticed this was there's this kind of running riff between Ron and Hermione over Scabbers and Crookshanks. Ron is very angry with Crookshanks and Hermione because Crookshanks, he feels like, just keeps harassing Scabbers for no reason. Or, I mean, the reason being Crookshanks is a cat and Scabbers is a rat, and that's what cats do. And Ron is just very angry that Hermione is not controlling Crookshanks. And at one point, Ron and Harry go down to Hagrid's hut to just talk with Hagrid. So Ron is complaining about Hermione and her lack of control over Crookshanks. And Hagrid responds and says, well, people are a little stupid about their pets. That just really stuck out to me. I'm pretty sure that went right over Ron's head. Or if it didn't, there was really no response to it. I just read that and I was like, that is a very wise thing to say. Ron probably took that as Hagrid agreeing with him and just being like, Hermione is being stupid about Crookshanks. But really, Hagrid could have just as easily been insinuating that Ron is being kind of stupid about Scabbers too. Like, it's the same thing. Hermione is protective of Crookshanks because that's her pet. Ron is protective of Scabbers because that's his pet. And both of them are not seeing the bigger picture, that it's not personal. It's just kind of how animals are. Of course, it was even bigger than that. But in the context of, not knowing anything about Peter Pettigrew, that's kind of how cats and mice are. Even deeper than that, Hagrid could have been kind of talking about himself too, unknowingly. In the midst of all this, Hagrid has Buckbeak, and he's very attached to Buckbeak. But arguably, Buckbeak is somewhat of a dangerous creature. He's a large creature with sharp talons and a sharp beak who is offended very easily. So, I mean, he's not the safest creature. Not saying that Malfoy didn't cause his own injury, because he kind of did. Malfoy is an idiot. And I'm not really sure how much Hagrid thinks of that, because this is the same year that Hagrid assigned a biting textbook to be the textbook for his class. So his standard of what is dangerous is quite different from the usual standard. So you could say that Hagrid was talking about Hermione, but also trying to teach Ron a lesson, but also subconsciously talking about himself and acknowledging that he's very attached to Buckbeak, regardless of the fact that Buckbeak is objectively a dangerous creature. But Hagrid is kind of being stupid about him. He loves him anyway. So in addition to that, there's also just more trust overall of the kids and allowing them to make their own decisions and giving them a little bit more liberties and freedom to do things. So this is the year that Hermione gets a time turner. We don't find this out, but it just shows that McGonagall is trusting Hermione with something that she had to go to the ministry to get special permission so that Hermione could have it. And that really shows McGonagall's trust in Hermione. And then the time turner becomes especially important later because Dumbledore actually entrusts Harry and Hermione to use the time turner to go back and save 2 innocent lives. And just the fact that Dumbledore allowed them and encouraged them to do this is just that is just ultimate trust. He's telling 2 13-year-olds to go back in time, to change the past, to save 2 innocent lives and not be seen. Just the fact that he did that, I felt that was also an important development just for Harry's character, because it really showed that he is a participant in this story now, and it's not just he's just a kid and this story is happening to him. He is now a participant. He has proven himself. Hermione has also proven herself that they're here to make things happen. They're really active participants now. They're not just passive kids that are going to have this story happen to them and they're going to react to what happens to them. They are really taking the lead at this point. And that is the point where the series really starts to get engaging because you really get to see the characters making moves on their own. I guess we saw the beginnings of this in the last book when they're making the polyjuice potion, but they did that somewhat illicitly. But now it's like sanctioned by Dumbledore. Dumbledore sees them as worthy of participating in this, and I just think that's great for them. So while we're on the subject of Dumbledore, at this point, the moral grayness of a lot of the characters are starting to come out. And what I mean by morally gray is characters that they're not completely good or bad. They may do good things for bad reasons or bad things for good reasons. And what's making me think of Dumbledore as somewhat verging into morally gray is at the very end in the hospital wing scene, Dumbledore is there with Snape and Fudge, and Snape is sure that Harry had something to do with Sirius escaping from Flitwick's office. And I mean, he's right. They did. And Dumbledore is just there smiling, and he's like, no. And I mean, he's lying through his teeth to Snape and to Fudge, but he's doing it, we like to think, for the right reasons, but it doesn't change the fact that he is lying to someone who trusts him and who he trusts. Up until this point, and even going forward, you still think of Dumbledore as just this grandfatherly, all-knowing, all-good figure, but like, this is just the first to come, I'm sure, of many things that you will think are a little bit questionable that Dumbledore does, or any other character that you deem as good does. It's a lesson for kids that you can't look at everything like it's black and white. So it's just going to be a tradition in these videos. We have our Snape update for this book. So in this book, we learn a little bit more about Snape's backstory. We learn that Harry's dad, Lupin, who are the other two? James Potter, Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, and Sirius. They were all a friend group, and Snape was on the outside of that. And Sirius played a little trick on Snape where Snape could have died. I don't know. I feel like that's a little bit dramatic because we've encountered the Whomping Willow so many times so far, and so far nobody has died because of the Whomping Willow, but I guess we'll take Snape's word. But anyway, he's been holding a grudge about that all these years, and it's been years. This happened when they were in school. And so with that information, I'm always looking for what is causing him to dislike Harry so much and just bully him at every chance he gets and be just so hard on him. And okay, so maybe he was bullied by Harry's dad, he was an outsider of the group, but is that really a reason to bully the guy's son so many years later? I feel like that can't be it. And what makes this whole situation with Snape and his character all the more interesting in this particular book. So I was talking about that scene where Harry and Hermione are in the hospital wing after they get back from their journey with the Time Turner, and Dumbledore, Snape, and Fudge are there talking with them, and Snape is just beside himself. He's so frustrated because Dumbledore doesn't believe him that Harry had something to do with Sirius escaping. And Fudge is telling Snape to calm down because he's acting crazy. And Dumbledore says to Fudge, Snape has just suffered a severe disappointment. And I'm trying to think about what exactly is that severe disappointment. Was it just that he wanted Harry expelled? He wanted Harry to be in that much trouble? And I was like, it has to be something else, because I don't think Snape really wants Harry expelled. Maybe he wants to be hard on him. Maybe he wants him to be in trouble. But for Dumbledore to say that Snape has had such a severe disappointment, I feel like it has to be something that's bigger than Harry being in trouble. The other option would be Snape was disappointed because he wanted to get back at Sirius for that prank that Sirius played on Snape all those years ago. Is that even worth severe disappointment? Like, that's pretty petty, like, to be still thinking about that. So I felt like that couldn't be it either. So I don't know if maybe I'm thinking too deeply into this, and I'm looking at it really maybe too much through the lens of knowing what happens with Snape. But the only thing that I can think of that would be that severely disappointing to Snape is just that he wanted to be the one to save Harry from Sirius, and he wasn't. He burst into the Shrieking Shack and Hermione or someone like knocked him out, and so he didn't get to be the hero. And I guess this is going to be a spoiler for following books, but we know that Snape's ultimate motivation was to protect Harry because he loved Lily. So I felt like maybe that was his severe disappointment. that he didn't get to save Harry from Sirius. I'm really just looking into Snape's actions and looking for the good motivation in everything he does. I'm just so interested in his character. This is a little bit off topic. We haven't really gotten to any romantic elements between any of the kids yet, and I'm not looking forward to it. I don't know, just the whole romance thing between the kids is just super cringy to me. But really, I think like the best love story of this entire series is Snape and Lily. Maybe it's wrong to say, because if it didn't become Lily and James, Harry wouldn't be here, but I just think Snape and Lily's love story, that's just Snape and Lily's or one-sided love story, that's just so tragic. That's just the most epic love story that never happened. And if I have to pick like a favorite love story from this entire series, it's them. I think that's just the most tragic. It's so Romeo and Juliet. It's just... So one last thing, just a difference with the movie. So I haven't watched the movies in a while, probably 2 years or so, but I do remember that in the movies, Hermione is really quickly integrated into the friend group. Like, she is kind of annoying for pretty much like just the first couple of months of Sorcerer's Stone, and then right after Harry and Ron save her from the troll, she is like solidified as part of the friend group, and they are just best friends equally, all three of them, ever since then. But in this book and in the last book, Hermione is taking a lot longer to really be integrated into the friend group. In this book, it's still Harry and Ron are like the best friends, and then there's Hermione, who is a little bit more than an acquaintance, but they don't really trust her with all of their secrets. She doesn't trust them, and so they're not like an equal triangle yet. And I noticed that in the last book, but it was just less apparent. But in this book, it feels really apparent. Like, Hermione is quite uptight in this book, and I understand why. She's very stressed with all of her classes. She has Crookshanks now. She's just really uptight. She's kind of paranoid. It's driving that wedge even further between Harry and Ron and herself. And so it's just a different feel from the movies. In the movies, they're all tight. Like, they're all just tight, and it's really a trio. But in this, it's more Harry and Ron, and then Hermione. There's nothing wrong with that. It actually makes a little bit more sense that it's taking Hermione longer to become really part of the group, since her starting point as a character is so far off from Harry and Ron's personalities. It doesn't make sense that she would just immediately be best friends with them. It's, taking her a little bit longer to develop her character in order to really fit in with Harry and Ron. But then by the end of this book, I think that's really where Hermione is truly solidified as a member of the trio. I think at the end of this book, when Dumbledore entrusts Harry and Hermione, and therefore Hermione trusts Harry to go with her to use the time turner and lets him know about that, that is when she's finally really solidified as a best friend. Okay, last thing. So I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about Harry seeing Uncle Vernon at King's Cross when he gets home from school. I was slowly starting to wonder even more, even by the end of the last book, what is the point of Harry continuing to return to the Dursleys? Like, is it any benefit for Harry, or is it only for literary purposes? So Dumbledore sent Harry to live with the Dursleys in the first place because he wanted him to grow up outside of the magical world where he'd be safe and no one would recognize him or bother him while he was young. Now at this point, he is in the magical world. He is well aware. He's entrusted to do things in the magical world, and he has friends. He has Ron and Ron's family who would be pleased to have Harry. So what is the reason for Harry to continue to go back to the Dursleys? Like, at this point, why doesn't he just move in with Ron? He could pay rent, especially after what happened at the beginning of this book with Aunt Marge. Like, the Dursleys don't even really want him back. So what would be the reason for Harry to continue to go there? Why doesn't he just, like, get emancipated and move on? Like, I can think of really no good reason for Harry to continue to live with the Dursleys. So that leaves me with, like, the literary perspective. If Harry never goes back to the Dursleys from the end of the third book up until the seventh book, then you could run into, like, two possible problems. The first one just being it's a loose end of what happens to the Dursleys at the end. Like, even Hermione's parents, we've never met them and we won't really meet them, but at the beginning of the 7th book, before they go off on their journey to find the Horcruxes, there's like a send-off with Hermione and her parents. And so if the Dursleys hadn't been seen like since the 3rd book and they're never heard from again, it would just feel like a loose end if they're never heard from again. Or they could be brought up again one last time in the 7th book in order to have like a send-off, but it might just feel like it's kind of out of left field because we haven't heard from them in so long, but they're not exactly like a new character like Hermione's parents. I don't know, like I guess that's really the only reason I can think of that Harry continues to have to deal with the Dursleys, because at this point I don't think Harry needs them anymore. So I really think it's purely for literary reasons. Am I looking too deeply into this? Whew, I've been talking for a long time, close to 50 minutes now. So I'm getting a little bit hoarse. It's probably time for me to go. Those are all of my thoughts on Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I had a lot to say about this book, so I can't imagine how much I'm going to have to say about the next book, which I am going to start reading soon after I recover from this one. That is it, I think, for this vlog. Really love this book. We'll see if it remains my top favorite. I don't know. Might have some stiff competition. Leave me a comment. What is your favorite Harry Potter book? If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss another Reading Harry Potter in my 30s video, because aren't these fun? I'm having so much fun. I hope you're having a ton of fun too. That is all for today. I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble, and I will see you next time. Bye!
Now that